My brother showed up at my bakery on a Thursday morning with a manila folder and a woman in a blazer I'd never seen before, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. He said, "We need to talk about the transfer." I was elbow deep in a batch of cardamom dough, flour on my forearms up to the elbow, and it took me a full 3 seconds to process what I was looking at. My brother, my sister-in-law standing behind him, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. A woman with a briefcase positioned slightly apart from them, the way people stand when they've been paid to appear neutral. "What transfer?" I said. He set the folder on my prep counter without asking. Without even glancing at the dough he was dangerously close to contaminating. "The business," he said. "We're formalizing the family arrangement." I want to tell you that what followed was a clean fight, that I raised my voice and said my piece and held my ground right there in my own kitchen. But the truth is, I stood there for a long moment and felt nothing except a strange cold displacement, like the floor had shifted 2 inches in a direction no one else could feel. I had been awake since 4:30 that morning. My head baker had called in sick and I'd come in early to proof the sourdough myself. I had 2 wedding cake consultations that afternoon, and a wholesale delivery going out at noon. My body was already running at full capacity, and my brain simply refused to load anything else on top of it. But what if I told you that wasn't even the worst part? What if the real betrayal had started 2 years earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in my parents' kitchen, while my mother signed something she didn't fully understand, and my sister-in-law stood by the window, smiling like nothing was happening at all? I opened Copper Rose Bakery in April, 4 years before any of this. I was 27 years old. I had an SBA loan for $47,000, a 5-year lease on a corner unit in Millbrook, and exactly 1 employee who doubled as my delivery driver on Saturdays. I did not have a safety net. I did not have family money behind me. What I had was a business plan I'd written in 3 drafts, a bank that believed in the numbers, and a stubbornness I'd inherited from a grandmother I barely remembered. My brother had been living in Phoenix then. 6 years out there, working in commercial real estate, doing well by all accounts, and asking about the bakery in that surface-level way that certain people have. "How's the little shop going?" That kind of thing. My sister-in-law was friendlier in the beginning. She'd stop by on holidays, compliment the croissants, post pictures on Instagram with a small business love caption underneath. I thought she meant it. I think most people mean what they say in the first year. When my father had his first health scare, a minor cardiac event the doctors described as a warning, not a crisis, my brother came back, moved home to be close, brought my sister-in-law, bought a house 15 minutes from my parents' place. I was grateful at first. I was so genuinely grateful that I let myself ignore the small things. The way my sister-in-law began offering to drive my mother to appointments. The way she started answering questions on my mother's behalf, finishing sentences, steering topics. The way my brother began asking careful, almost gentle questions about how I'd structured the business. "Is it an LLC? Everything just under your name? What happens if something happens to you?" I thought it was concern. I thought it was family. The folder he set on my prep counter that morning contained a document I had never seen in my life. It was formatted to look official, not court-issued but close enough to make a person hesitate. It referenced something called a family investment agreement, dated 2 years prior. My mother's signature was on page 3, my father's was on page 4. The document claimed that the startup costs for Copper Rose Bakery had been funded in part by a family trust, and that as a result, the business was jointly held. My name was on it too, in a signature line I absolutely did not sign. "This isn't real," I said. My brother's expression didn't change. Mom and Dad agreed this is how things should be structured. "This isn't real," I said again, louder this time, and I watched my sister-in-law glance at the woman with the briefcase, just briefly, like a check-in between people who'd rehearsed this. My 2 employees were in the front of the shop. I could hear the espresso machine cycling. I could hear a customer asking about the lemon tarts in the case. My whole nervous system was trying to keep me functional in 2 separate places at once, and it wasn't working. "I need you to leave," I said. "We're not trying to make this adversarial," my sister-in-law said. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was careful and even, the way certain people are careful when they know they're being watched. "We just want what's fair for the whole family." They left. I called the police. "I want to be clear about this, because I know exactly what you're thinking, and you're right to think it," I called. An officer arrived within 40 minutes, reviewed the document, and listened to me explain what had happened. He was patient. He was also unable to do anything about it. This is a civil matter, he said. If there's a dispute over ownership or signatures, that has to go through the court system. You'd need an attorney. I had never felt more isolated standing in a room I legally owned. I called my best friend Priscilla from inside my walk-in cooler because it was the only space in the building that had a door and no one behind it. She's been my closest friend since our second year of college. The kind of person who picks up on the second ring and doesn't waste the first 30 seconds asking if you're okay. Tell me, she said. I told her everything. Okay, she said when I was done. I'm calling my cousin. She does business litigation. You are not handling this alone. I didn't cry. I didn't have time to cry. I had a noon delivery and 2 consultations, and I was standing in a 34-degree walk-in cooler, holding my phone with both hands because they were shaking, and I didn't want anyone in the front of the shop to see. That evening I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived. She hugged me before I could say a word, the way she always does, and for a moment I just held on and tried to figure out where to begin. I showed her the document. I pointed to her signature on page 3. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. I signed some papers, she said finally. Your brother said it was for tax purposes, for protecting family assets if anything happened to your father. Her voice had that particular quality, steady on the surface, confused underneath, that told me everything. She didn't know. She genuinely did not know what she had put her name on. My father came in from the living room and read the document over my shoulder. He went very quiet. He has a specific stillness when he's angry, not explosive, not loud, just a deliberate kind of silence that fills the room completely. I need to make a call, he said. He called my brother right there at the kitchen table. I sat and listened to one side of a conversation that started controlled and ended with my father saying, quietly, "That is not what we agreed to. That is not what you told us." My brother must have offered some explanation about being misunderstood. My father said, "Then come over here and say that to your sister's face," and set the phone down. My brother didn't come. The next morning I met Priscilla's cousin, Ms. Wentworth, at her office downtown. The space was small and orderly in a way that made me trust her immediately. One plant on the windowsill, a whiteboard covered in case notations, a desk clear of everything except what mattered. She read the document in approximately 4 minutes. The signature on page 3 carries a notary stamp, but the notary ID is registered to a closing agent who retired in 2019, she said. That alone creates a significant problem for their position. What does that mean exactly? It means someone either fabricated this document or paid someone to authenticate it improperly. Either way, this is no longer just a business ownership dispute. She looked up at me. Has your brother or sister-in-law ever had access to your business accounts or personal identifying information? The question arrived somewhere I hadn't expected. 2 years ago, a specific Saturday afternoon, my sister-in-law had offered to help me file my Q3 sales tax return because I was behind and overwhelmed. I'd given her my EIN and my login credentials to the state's business portal. I thought I was accepting help. I thought that was what family... Yes, I said. Ms. Wentworth wrote something down without reacting. Okay, I need your business registration records from the state, your original SPA loan documents, and your articles of incorporation, everything. End of week. I had all of it. Every document was in a fireproof lockbox under my desk at the bakery, exactly where I'd placed it the day I signed each one. I had kept everything because a retired accountant had once told me that every piece of paper from the day you open a business is worth more than the paper it's printed on. That same week I pulled my security footage. I'd installed cameras 2 years earlier after a break-in at the shopping centre down the street. Nothing that touched my shop, but enough to make me careful. The cameras covered the front entrance, the prep area, and my office. Cloud backup going back 18 months. I searched for footage from a specific Tuesday 14 months ago, when my sister-in-law had stopped by to drop something off. I remembered the day vaguely. I'd been mid-order, barely had time to say hello. She'd asked if she could use my office to make a call. I said of course. The footage showed her at my desk for 11 minutes. At one point she opened the top drawer. At another she held something up toward her phone and photographed it. She was back in the hallway before I'd finished piping the next tier of a 3-layer cake. I sent the clip to Miss Wentworth with a subject line that I later recognised as almost too composed. Found this. She replied within the hour. This just became a significantly stronger case. My brother left a voicemail that weekend. I let it go and listened afterward. He said things like protecting mum and dad's legacy, and you need to understand the bigger picture. His voice carried the particular patience of someone who believes they've already won. I forwarded it to Ms. Wentworth without comment. My sister-in-law sent a text that read, "I hope we can handle this like adults." I didn't respond. What I didn't know until later was that my father had contacted Ms. Wentworth's office on his own. He wanted to give a statement. She told him the most useful thing he could do was write down exactly what he'd been told when he signed the documents and what he'd understood them to mean. He handwrote 4 pages. My mother did the same. Both statements made clear they had been told the papers were related to estate planning, protecting assets in the event of a health crisis, not to any transfer of business ownership. My brother visited my parents twice in the weeks that followed to clarify the situation. My father asked him to leave both times. Ms. Wentworth filed an emergency petition challenging the validity of the agreement and requesting injunctive relief to prevent any transfer of business assets. My brother and sister-in-law were served on a Tuesday morning. My sister-in-law posted something on social media that afternoon about family wounds that cut deeper than anyone sees. She deleted it within 3 hours. Priscilla sent me a screenshot anyway. The hearing date was set 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the court granted a temporary restraining order. My brother could make no claim on the bakery, its accounts, or its registered assets while the case was pending. Ms. Wentworth also flagged the notary discrepancy to the state licensing board. The morning of the hearing, I wore the blazer I'd bought for my SBA loan meeting 4 years ago. It still fit. I sat at the plaintiff's table and watched my brother and sister-in-law settle into their chairs across the room. My brother didn't look at me. My sister-in-law looked at me once, briefly, with an expression I couldn't quite name. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation that had run out of variables. Their attorney opened by describing Copper Rose Bakery as a family venture built on shared sacrifice and collective investment. He used the word family 6 times in his opening statement. I counted. Ms. Wentworth presented the LLC registration, filed solely in my name, 3 months before the SBA loan was even approved. She presented the loan agreement, which named no co-borrowers. She presented the notary discrepancy. She presented both of my parents' written statements. She played the camera footage from my office. The judge watched it twice. Their attorney objected. The judge overruled. When my brother was asked whether he had explained the full nature of the documents to my parents before asking them to sign, he said, "They understood the spirit of what we were doing." The judge looked at him for a moment. "That is not the same as informed consent," she said. When it was my turn, I didn't try to sound composed. I just said what was true. That I had borrowed $47,000 in my own name, on my own credit, and spent 3 years paying it down while working weeks that started before sunrise. That my family had not contributed $1 to the startup costs or the operating expenses. That I had given my sister-in-law limited administrative access as a gesture of trust, and that I believed she had used it to collect information that made a forged document appear more credible. I said, "This isn't a misunderstanding about family money. This is a business I built being claimed by people who watched me build it and decided they wanted it." The judge ruled in my favour. She upheld my sole ownership of Copper Rose Bakery and all of its assets. She granted a permanent injunction preventing any future claim without legal standing. She also referred the matter of the forged notary stamp to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of potential fraud. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Wentworth shook my hand. Priscilla was on the steps and hugged me before I reached the second stair. A local journalist was nearby. The forged notary detail had apparently circulated in courthouse channels. She asked if I'd like to comment. I said, "I built my business legally, kept every document, and trusted the system to know the difference between a real signature and a fabricated one. It did." That was all I needed to say. 3 weeks after the ruling, I repainted the interior of the bakery, not because anything needed changing. The walls were perfectly fine, but I'd had a paint sample card pinned to my corkboard for 2 years, a warm terracotta I kept talking myself out of, and I finally just stopped arguing with myself about it. The crew finished on a Saturday afternoon and I stood in the empty shop after they left. The smell of fresh paint layered over the permanent ghost of cardamom and browned butter, and let myself be in it without bracing for anything. My mother called that week. She cried a little. Just enough to let me know she understood the weight of what had almost happened. She apologised. I told her she had nothing to apologise for. She'd been misled by someone she trusted, in her own kitchen, on an ordinary afternoon. That wasn't her failure, that was his choice. My father sent a text message. Proud of you. Always have been. Always will be. I read it 4 times and then saved it. I haven't spoken to my brother since the day of the hearing. I haven't replied to the 2 emails my sister-in-law sent in the weeks following, both of which opened with words like perspective and healing, and I never meant for it to reach this point. I've thought about what she meant by that last part. I'm still not sure she knows herself. Priscilla comes into the bakery on Sunday mornings now. She sits at the corner table with a latte and her laptop and doesn't make any kind of occasion of it. She just shows up. I've realised that's the thing about the people who are actually in your corner. They don't announce it, they just stay. The SBA loan closed out the month after the hearing, paid in full, almost 4 years to the day from when I signed for it. I hired a second full-time baker in the fall. I'm looking at a second location. Nothing confirmed, just looking. Numbers, demographics, lease terms. The same way I started the first time. Some mornings I come in before sunrise and stand at the back door with my coffee and watch the flower supplier's truck pull into the alley, and I think about how close it all came. How I stood in my own kitchen on a Thursday morning with dough on my arms while someone set a forged document on my prep counter, and my brain couldn't immediately process it as real, because the people holding it were people I'd known my entire life. There's a version of this story where I freeze, where I hand something over, because the pressure of family feels heavier than the weight of what I know to be true. I understand that version. I was standing in it for about 15 minutes that morning before something in me recalibrated. What saved me wasn't composure. It wasn't even courage exactly. It was a fireproof lockbox under a desk and 4 years of keeping every single piece of paper that ever had my name on it. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the one who holds the ground. You just have to be the one who kept the receipts. And if someone has ever stood in a space you built and told you it was never really yours, with paperwork, with silence, with the kind of slow pressure that comes dressed up as love, I hope you know it is never too late to open that lockbox and let the document say what your voice is too tired to repeat. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I read everyone. And if stories like this one mean something to you, subscribe, because the next chapter is already coming and you don't want to miss where it goes.